All right. Welcome. Boys
Hello,
and girls.
hello.
Welcome to History According to Hollywood.
Woo!
We're back, continuing season 3. And we are on to one of the biggest movies, period, ever.
We have an absolutely Titanic-sized episode for you.
Oh!
Hey.
Titanic-sized episode. We also have a guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself, Ryan?
How you doing? My name is Ryan Estrada. I am an author, artist, adventurer who travels around the world making comics about things that I experience. And I'm excited for this podcast because a lot of my books are about history and the decisions I have to make when I'm taking history and turning it into a narrative. When I was watching this movie with this podcast in mind, I'm thinking about decisions he made, and I'm like, wait, these are the same decisions I made. Did I learn how to write history from watching Titanic in 1997? So, yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
That's
You
awesome.
could pick worse movies, my man. You could pick worse movies to learn from.
Yeah, we've definitely covered a few already.
Also, happy to know that Ryan's the coolest person on this podcast right now. That's
Yeah. So you travel the world and you write comics. Do you want to? What was the origin of that?
Yeah, so I started making comics like before I could speak, and decided when I was 6 years old it was time to go pro, and started sending stuff out to newspapers.
Very
So
nice.
it was never really a decision that I can remember making. It was just always what I was going to do. I ended up bothering the same newspaper until for 10 years until they hired me at 16, and I've been going ever since. I've worked on comics for Star Trek, Popeye, Garfield, Flash Gordon, lots of stuff like that. But of course, my main thing is my own books, like Banned Book Club. That's a true story of my wife being hunted down by the cops for reading banned books in the 1980s. My new book, No Rules Tonight, is about the history of Korea when there was a curfew, and the only exception was December 24th. So that's why Christmas Eve became like a night of debauchery, because the only night you could do whatever you wanted. And just lots of other things about either history or places I've traveled, people I've met, experiences that I've had. And I try to do as many books as possible.
That sounds awesome, man.
nice.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Yeah, today, if you haven't figured it out, we're talking about Titanic. That little movie that they made a few years back. Is it 96?
97, I think.
97. I don't know why I always want to think it's 96. 1997.
I was working at Showcase Cinemas 6 through 12. I had to rip people's tickets and send them right in there, so I remember it well.
There you go. Well, I'm sure you had quite a few tickets to rip. This movie grossed
Yeah.
$2.2 billion. It
Made
says
a
it's
couple
the
of bucks.
second. Yeah, it says it's the second highest grossing, but then Endgame, I don't know. I'm gonna say it's in the top 5. Let's just put it at that, because these numbers are always bouncing around. They re-released Avatar, so it would be Endgame. I don't know. Not getting into the details on that. Somehow this movie is sitting at a 7.9 on IMDb, an 88% from critics, and a 69% from audiences. Okay. All right. Don't really agree with that, but okay. It swept the Oscars, winning in 11 categories, including Best Picture and Best Director, of course, Mr. James Cameron. Yeah, I mean, I feel like 95% of the population has seen this movie. Maybe.
It's got to be a lot of people have seen this movie for sure.
Let me say 95% of the American population and a good chunk of the international population has seen this movie.
Yeah.
What was your first experience actually watching this movie?
Well, like I said, I was working at the cinema, so I got to see all the movies the night before. Felt very fancy as a teenager that I got to do that. And I don't remember if that was one of the movies I saw, because at 3 hours, we'd have to watch the movies like the night before they came out.
Right.
So I don't know if I was like, oh, this is a 3-hour movie. I'll be here all night. I got to go to school tomorrow.
Right.
So I don't remember if I watched it early, but I definitely watched it very early in its run, if not. And yeah, it's a great, well-made movie that just has so many different genres in it, and really and I could tell even then just how much James Cameron cared about history and making all the details right. I found fascinating.
Yeah, we've got a lot to unpack here, but interesting enough, it kind of flew right by. It was 3 hours, but man, I was sitting here. I was like, man, we're already at the end. That's a rare thing for me. Kyle can attest to that. I am a 90-minute on the dot.
Yeah, if it gets more than an hour 45, Dustin starts getting antsy, man. He has to get up and take a walk.
But this movie, I sat down and I watched it all the way through. This is a first-time watch for me from start to finish. I had seen pieces of it, and I'm pretty sure I'd seen like the second half of it, but I'd never sat down and watched it all the way through from credits to credits. Yeah, and I didn't get up. I didn't leave. It was a great movie, and I was like, wow, this is so much better than my original perception of it was going to be. So let's dive in, man.
Let's do it.
I want to say that when we get to like the opening, I want to talk about. I have a new favorite game that I just discovered while rewatching the movie for this podcast. That like we talked about how there's so much movie here. There's so much movie that people forget parts of it, that even though those parts are incredibly famous. So my new favorite thing is you walk in a room of people, or you can do it in an online group, and just say, I'm going to describe the opening to a movie that you have definitely seen about 4 times at the minimum. You tell me when you can figure out the movie and watch everyone freak out. So I say, tell me which movie begins with 2 robots named Snoop Dogg and Duncan.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And you forget how many times those names are said and are printed on screen.
Yeah.
Snoop Dogg and Duncan. And that select scenes are presented in Snoop Vision, a filming technique so expensive that its name appears on screen during the movie. And while Duncan is down the hall trying to pull off a jewel heist in the piano bar, Snoop Dogg breaks into a woman's hotel room to steal her nudes. And Snoop's boss puts the nudes on TV in an attempt to prove he is not a grave robber. And people are like, what the hell are you talking about? That is not a movie I have ever seen.
That's definitely, yeah. That's incredible, man. Yeah,
that is an amazing description of the beginning of Titanic. Actually,
I've done it like 3 times now, and the people that are like, what? Stop! You're lying to me. That's not a movie. And then as soon as I say like, they're like, no one's seen that. I'm like, it was the most successful film of all time for like a decade.
Right.
And they're like, is that Titanic? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh my god, that is Titanic.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. Yeah, so this team of explorers is led by Bill Paxton, who's in everything in the 90s. And then we get actual shots of the real Titanic on the ocean floor that James Cameron visited, I want to say 12 times. Apparently, he got all the shots that he wanted his first dive down, but felt so connected that he like broke down into tears when he came to the surface. And he actually spent a good chunk of time filming the wreckage. So, Kyle, first question to you. Who has permission to explore the Titanic wreckage? Is it just kind of anybody that wants to go look at it?
When you get that deep into the ocean, permission is a really strong term because it's really who has the money to afford the equipment to go do it.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of who you have to ask to go, you have to ask the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia.
Okay.
Because that's the coast who handles the coastline, and it's vaguely off the coast of Nova Scotia. And I couldn't tell you how that came to be, because salvage rights are a relatively new thing. But since 1994, that's who has had jurisdiction over who can go to the Titanic and take artifacts out of it.
So the artifact that they're looking for is called the Heart of the Ocean. It's a jewel that was apparently cut from the crown of one of the Teen Henrys. Any legitimacy to this jewel, this Heart of the Ocean jewel?
No, and to just preface all questions, nothing in the Jack Rose Power Hour romance is real.
It was real to me, damn it.
Well, it was real to me too, but none of it actually happened. So the Heart of the Ocean, or whatever they call it, is based really heavily off the Hope Diamond. Like, it looks just like the Hope Diamond if you took the Hope Diamond and put it in a necklace. It's not based on any known jewel that the Titanic was carrying. And then Jack and Rose's immediate family aren't real people.
Right.
Like, they didn't exist. But pretty much everybody they encounter, in terms of who works on the ship, the famous people on the ship, those are all real people. So
right, and we're gonna get to them here in a little bit. There's the meme of it's been 84 years and this is when Rose in present time, well, 97 present time, is describing the events that took place on the Titanic. But the line is, it's been 84 years and I can still smell the fresh paint. The China had never been used. The Titanic was called the ship of dreams. I do like that right before we go into this beautiful segue, we're going to transport back in time to 1912. We have a CGI rendering of the most traumatic life experience that she has ever been through. And they're like, this is exactly what happened with the Titanic. It broke here, it sank here. And they're like showing this old lady, and it's like, do you not think twice about the things that you're doing?
And they're excited about it. Like it's because, they're researchers, and it's incredible that they have this technology and that they can do this, but they are very, very. I also think it's interesting that the head treasure hunter himself, so the guy who in theory should be the most callous, is the one who's like, hey, jackass, like she watched 1,000 people die. Maybe calm down.
Maybe don't do that.
Take a step back.
Yeah, so we're going to return to 1912 in spectacular fashion. The cars, the
what
technology.
A shot too! Like the first shot of
it's beautiful.
Of the dock. This movie. God, I love this movie so much.
The clothing, everything. It looks great. They compare it to I'm going to butcher this name. They compare it to another ship, Mauritania. Okay, thank you. They say it's a ship of comparable size at the time. Is this important? Is this anything that we know about?
So it's a good reference because the Mauritania is built and launched in 1906. So it's also a large ocean liner. Mm-hmm. And until the launch of the Olympic line of ships, which is the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic, the Mauritania is the largest ship. And so the implication is that Rose has sailed on the largest ship up to that point, and that she doesn't think the Titanic is much bigger, and the Titanic is indeed noticeably bigger.
Okay. So she's just difficult to impress.
She's just being blasé because she's her, and also because of the situation she finds herself in, which I'm sure we'll get into as we discuss the movie.
I'm going to gloss right over all
but
of that.
It is a full 92 feet longer than the Mauritania. So even for as long as they are, it is like noticeably bigger than the Mauritania.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting about Rose saying that is that when she first says it, it sounds like she's saying like, dismissing it because she expects fancier. Mm-hmm. But it's really like she does not care about any of this fancy stuff at all.
Right. Yeah. She's not impressed with material things.
Because the point is like why does it matter that the ship is 100 feet long? Like what's the point here?
We may live in a material world, but she is not a material girl.
Hey, if you heard that Madonna, we'd or is it Cyndi Lauper?
That's Madonna.
Is it okay?
Yeah. No, I only F with Madonna. Not Cyndi Lauper.
Well, hey girl, hey, if you wanted to throw your local podcast some dough.
I think she's got bigger fish to fry.
Micha on La Isla Bonita.
Anyways, moving on. Madonna is a real one, though. She could have starred in this. She really could have starred in this, in all honesty.
If it had been, 5 years earlier, probably. Yeah. But,
no, 97? All right.
You know what? Don't go after Kate Winslet like that, man.
Ryan, what do you think?
I was just going to say that when Madonna was a kid, she used to ride her bike in the same park as my dad.
Oh. Hey. There you go. We have a connection. Yeah, so Rose reveals that she's not happy with her current situation. Meanwhile, Jack, who looks 12.
Yes.
Leonardo DiCaprio looks like he is a child.
Leonardo DiCaprio went from looking 15 to looking 40. And there was no in between.
And it didn't happen until he was 50.
And he was in the
I don't even know how old he is. How old is Leonardo DiCaprio?
I think he is pretty close to 50 at this point. Let's see. Let's do a little.
I'm doing it real quick. He was born in 1974, which means he was 23. He was 23 when this came out?
Mm-hmm.
What? He does not look 23.
He will be 50 in 3 days.
So he was when he made Titanic, he was too old for him to date now?
Yes.
No. I think he still has a year or two. Yeah, I think
it's 26, right? Isn't 26 the cutoff?
The cutoff is. I don't know.
And then Kate Winslet was 18 or 19, if I remember right.
See, I think Kate Winslet looks older than him. She's 1 year younger.
Oh, okay.
She was born in 75, which would put her at being 22 when the movie was
Her character is supposed to be like 8. That's right. Okay, I'm with you.
Is her character supposed to? I don't know if it's ever revealed exactly how old her character is supposed to be.
No, but the implication is that they're young because she lives until 1996, 1997, and so like she would have to be 20.
Oh yeah, she was
18
like
to 20. Because she's still like 100.
Like, don't they say
she'd be
that
like
would
102?
Yeah,
so,
they would be like it's 101. She's 100 years old or 101. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah,
so she'd have to be 17 or 18 or 19 would be the kind of the implication of the movie.
Just what is it? 1912 to 1997. So that'd be 85 years. 85
it's been
years.
84 years.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Also, every single every single thing she says and does is 100% teenager.
Yeah. So I don't know. For like, I always got the impression that he's like 20 or 21 and she's like 18 or 19. Like they're both young, but he's just a slightly different type of young.
I thought she was like 20 and he was like 16.
Well, he was not 16 in any stretch of the.
He looked 16.
He always looked 16. He's Leo DiCaprio. Until he filmed The Revenant, and then it permanently aged him to 55.
That's true. That Oscar. At what cost, man? At what cost? Jack calls his third class seat practically royalty, jumping on at the last possible moment. And just like that, we're set for America. All right. What is the planned itinerary for this voyage? Where is the Titanic supposed to be going?
It is supposed to be going to New York City. It is leaving from Southampton, which is England, and then it takes a brief pit stop in Ireland, and it's on its maiden voyage to New York. It is supposed to take right at 5 full days.
Okay.
So, ironically enough, the day, because it's early in the morning when Titanic sinks. So the day that Titanic sinks, later that day, they were supposed to arrive in New York.
Okay.
Or maybe the day after. So it's a week, give or take, little under a week of just constant sailing. There's not necessarily organized itineraries back then. They're not cruise ships; they're passenger liners. It's a different it's a different thing. So you have, if you're in first class, you have nightly dinner, nightly smoking lounges. You have activities on promenade decks. Interestingly enough, about Titanic though, is that the second and third class passengers also had dining rooms and also had promenade decks. And so part of the reason Jack is so excited to be on the Titanic specifically is because the White Star Line, so the company that funds the Titanic, it is slowly but surely doing away with the lack of accommodations for the lower classes of passengers.
Gotcha.
So a third class berth is nowhere near a first class berth or even a second class berth. But in older ships, it was just like open season. It would just be massive rooms of hammocks, basically, or bunks. And in Titanic, at most, you're sharing a room with 7 or 8 other people, which is still a lot, but it's like the difference between a youth hostel and a refugee camp almost in terms of how the accommodations feel. So when you're used to traveling in steerage of older liners and it's a free-for-all and you just hang your hammock or find your cot wherever it is in steerage, you actually get a room, and that room has a sink, and there are bathrooms, and there's a dining hall, and there's a relaxation place, and you can get out and have fresh air, and the rich people don't yell at you because you have your own deck. And so
that's cool. Have either of you ever been on a cruise?
I've been on, like, when I was in Japan, I took an overnight boat that took me to a different part of Japan. I wouldn't call it a cruise.
Gotcha.
But the one interesting thing about that was that the movie they showed on the boat was Titanic.
That seems
no.
Like, is this the best movie to watch?
Right, that seems terrible.
Oh no.
It's like watching Lost on a plane.
I had more fun watching the people watch it because you see like the old man like nervously looking out the window for icebergs. Like, we're in Japan, man, you're fine. And then see like the young guy watch it and be like eye over, like, I could make it into the first class car. I could meet somebody.
I could do
there you
that.
Go. I can draw. Yeah. So you kind of went over this contrast of wealth, not only in the movie. Some shared rooms, while others unloaded their original Picasso paintings into their private cabanas.
Yep.
In lower decks, men shoveled coal into engines. So you had possibly even a lower class than what's considered in the movie. They call it third class for the lower decks. This is a couple of the wide shots here. I kind of laughed at because parts of it are rendered really well, and other parts of it legitimately look like PS2 graphics, which I understand. It's 97. It's just something that I think's fun because I can watch. I've watched movies from like 2010, and I was like, oh, this looks like it's so weird. I wonder. There's got to be a phenomenon to it. When you watch something for the first time and it appears so real to you, and then you go back a decade later and you watch it and you go, how did I think that was like legit? Like, there's got to be some sort of explanation to it. But anyways, I'm sure this wowed audiences in 97, but it legitimately, I mean, PS2, I don't even think was out at that time. So it still was good CGI. But yeah, a couple of them, like the people walking on decks, like are total like sim characters. They're walking in one direction and they just like totally spin and then the same exact cadence walking in another. It's just funny.
Yeah, it's nothing ages perfectly is the thing.
Oh no.
But on the flip side, the crazy part about this movie is how many of these shots don't look outdated, because it's like the vast majority of it is still really, really good, but it makes the handful that do, like, all the more noticeable. You're like, okay.
Jurassic Park came out just a couple of years prior to this, and I mean it has aged incredibly as well. But there is something to say about practical versus computer generated. Obviously, there are limitations when you're creating and trying to capture in a single shot the entire Titanic with multiple decks and people on every deck and things happening. There are limitations to it, but I agree. It does age it to an extent, but you know, it's in a way it's charming.
Yeah.
There's a shot that I had never noticed it until it was pointed out on the Blank Check podcast. And once you know about it, you can't unsee it. There's a scene where Jack and Rose are running through the water in the hallway, and it's like there's a strobe light and it's in slow motion. And they had two stunt doubles run through the hallway and then literally took a still photo of each person's head, and it just kind of moves like this it's like the jib jab Christmas cards where like you upload your photo.
Right.
It's literally that. The heads are the wrong size, they don't move, and it's in slow motion.
I have always thought that scene looked weird, but I've never been able to figure out why.
Same.
But that's it's like that. It's just 2 minutes of the movie, but you're like, why does this look so strange? And
it's strange.
That's what it is. Like
I swear, there's also one where Rose's face is CGI'd. I looked it up. I could not find it confirmed, but she's looking like almost directly at the camera, and it looks like she either didn't have the correct makeup on or didn't have makeup on, and they tried to put it on CGI. She looks so fake, and then she turns, it cuts, and she turns, and it looks totally normal. I was like, and it looks like two different people. All right, so Jack sees Rose for the first time. He appears mesmerized. She looks annoyed. They meet again as she is fleeing from her prison of privilege. Maybe I should have stayed in England. Maybe I shouldn't marry him. Nope, I've got to jump from the ship. It's like, that was quite the literal jump to conclusions. Jack literally tosses her off the ledge, catching her as she slips back, or as she slips off the back of the ship, dangling above the freezing water. I do like the foreshadowing here where he's talking about just how cold the water is and how painful being in water that cold is. Though I've never been in water as cold as the Titanic, but like when you're in really cold water, the way he describes it as being stabbed by 10,000 knives, I don't know if that's the best like analogy to use for super cold. I don't know, maybe if you're in it for longer. I thought that was I was like, that might be a little dramatic there.
Well, to give you an idea, since it's ocean water, the water around the Titanic was 28 degrees Fahrenheit, so it was below freezing.
It was near freezing for salt water.
So it's liquid ice is really what you're.
So Rose explains her peril to Jack, who blatantly asked if she loves her fiance. She's not impressed by his antics, but she just happens to know his drawings. And this is where she's like, oh, he's not so bad. He's fine. She's like kind of annoyed, kind of like, you can tell she's like flirting with him. But when she sees his drawings is when she's like, oh, there's something to him.
There's depth to this guy.
Yeah. So he tells her about his like gypsy-esque life, and she wishes to follow along to live as whimsically as he does. we're gonna meet some of the other passengers here, and this is what you're hinting at earlier. The captain of the Titanic. It's mentioned that this is supposed to be his final voyage before retirement. Is there any truth to that? And who is this guy?
So this guy is Captain Edward Smith. He joined the White Star Line as an officer in 1880 and served from 1880 until his death in the sinking of the Titanic. It's not much of a spoiler. Most people who know anything about the Titanic know the captain went down with the ship.
Spoiler, I didn't know it was going to sink.
Oh, yeah. Well, sorry. hate to ruin it for you. So for 32 years, he is a officer and then a captain with the White Star Line. Mm-hmm. He also was a Royal Naval Reserve sailor during the Second Boer War, which is this colonial war that the British fight against South Africa in the early 1900s. However, in terms of him retiring after the voyage, that is a debatable point. So basically all of Captain Smith surrounding the Titanic is uncertain because we have theories that people seem to have just come up with that don't match any of the sources we have. And so one theory is that he was going to retire, and there's absolutely no proof of that. It was probably said in passing one time that he's thinking about retiring, but it adds to the tragedy of it, right? So most of the theories around Titanic that you can't find proof for are really just people upping the ante on the tragedy, because it's like your natural response. And it's also this idea of this ill-fated quote unquote cruise that we'll probably get into later. But he's not intending to retire, but he is older, and he has captained several boats, and he has reached the point where the White Star Line always wants him to be the captain of the newest, best ship. So the implication is when they come out with the newest one, it's up to him to decide whether he wants to captain it or retire. It's kind of, so it was in the works, but it wasn't like this is my last voyage and then I'm done forever sort of deal.
Shout out Titanic Museum in Branson, Missouri. Ryan, have you ever been there? Nope. All right. Well, it's the most random thing. So we're both from Missouri, and down in Branson is like the showman city of our area, and there's a half Titanic sized building that is just
shaped
a Titanic,
like the Titanic
museum. Yeah, it's literally like the shape. Everything is painted to look like the outside of the Titanic, and it's just half of it. There's like a whole museum that you can go learn about all these things. But I always thought it was so strange it's in the middle of Missouri that you can find these things.
But it is, it's, even though they've opened other ones, I think it's still like the biggest single collection of Titanic artifacts in the world or something. It's.
I did see pictures that Snoop and Duncan are in there.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
that's
they've added
so
stuff.
Cool.
They also have one in Pigeon Forge now, and so they've gotten even more like artifacts and stuff.
Who names
which is
these
cool.
cities, man? What the hell,
dude? I don't know, man.
I just found out there's a Little Rock, Arkansas, and there's also a Little Flock, Arkansas. Hey. Not too far away from here, so that's fun. Moving on, back to not Arkansas, back to the middle of the ocean. Jack is gonna wow the royals with his unintentional toast to making life interesting and making every day count. At the end of dinner, as the men go to drink their brandy and leave the women, Jack
and as Rose says,
note,
compliment themselves over being the masters of their universe.
Right. Jack leaves a note in Rose's hand to escape away from the upper deck and find a new crowd to party with. And party they do. They party like it's 1929, drinking dark beer and dancing Irish jigs. But Cal's henchman spots Rose below deck, and Cal shows his evil side the morning after, threatening her to never embarrass him like that again, or else more tables will be flipped.
That is such an excellent plot shift, though, because prior to this point, Cal's just a pretentious ass, but you don't fully understand why Rose can't just, for lack of a better term, suck it up, because her family's broke, and the only way to maintain their lifestyle is to marry somebody rich enough to keep it. And he's condescending, but he's not, up until that point, he's not abusive or mean. He's just kind of a rich snob. And then the switch flips and you're like, oh,
he wants to own her.
That's why she can't just
like
deal with, okay, which is a great plot point because you go from being mildly sympathetic to Rose to like fully sympathetic to Rose.
Yeah. And this is Cal is played by Billy Zane, aka the man with the most pronounced facial features.
He has a
ever.
snooty face, man. He's a pretty guy, but he has a snooty face.
If you drew
and it is incredibly important that you hate this guy immediately because they are just she's just straight up cheating on her fiance in front of everyone on the boat constantly, but you hate him so much you're like, yeah, it's fine.
And you feel it even before you see it. You kind of feel it. You're like, yeah, I don't know, this guy doesn't seem as benevolent as he pretends that he is. And then that happens, you're like, oh well, shit, there it is.
Right. And I mean, I hate to say it, but for the time, he's probably until the end of the movie, he's probably pretry common, pretty middle of the road for early 1900s. I don't know that's going to vary greatly from person to person, and probably even from culture to culture. But still,
unfortunately, he's not as abnormal as we'd like to think that he is like today. Yeah. Nobody would have supported that, but nobody would have been like, yeah, I can't do that, Cal. Women have rights, dude. It's 1912. Not yet.
I mean, that sounds bad, but
they should have. We're not saying that it's not okay.
I'm not against it.
We're not against women's rights. No, wrong, bad. Right. You know what we're saying. Shut up. It. You've listened to this podcast a few times. It's okay. Keep rolling. We're moving on.
All right.
Excellent. On. So proud of us.
Rose points out a tidbit that there are not enough lifeboats for the capacity of passengers on the ship.
And later, Jack points out a tidbit.
Shut up.
Delete that, please.
No, that's going to start the episode.
Oh, no.
Jack has to sneak onto the upper deck to talk to Rose, saying he has 10 butts in his pocket and nothing else to offer her. Rose shuts the door in his face, literally, though her immediate response is that she's made the wrong choice. And that night, she finds him on the lower deck, and they share a kiss on the last night the Titanic will ever see day.
And then they share more than a kiss, my good man.
Hey, man, we're getting there.
I'm sorry. It's also worth noting that when she asks Thomas Andrews about the designer of the ship about why there aren't more lifeboats, he says, well, I could have put more on, but they said it disrupted the skyline too much, and so they told me no. And so there's this it's brilliant. There's this growing message because everybody knows, like, you're watching it knowing what happens to the Titanic.
I like to think there were a handful of people out there that were like,
maybe
I
there
love
were
this
a
romance
few.
movie, and they were just traumatized when the boat started to sink.
But it's brilliant by James Cameron knowing that the vast majority of his audience is going to know what happens, and so this like growing insinuation that this ship is too opulent to exist. Like there's too many decisions that are being made in the face of common sense for this to like end well.
Right.
And speaking of faces, it's amazing. Like Victor Garber is so great in that role, and just watching his expression, you see the like he wants to be like, I told you, like I told him,
right?
But like he has to like he's representing the company, he's talking to a passenger, so he has this look on his face like, oh yeah, well that was my suggestion, and everyone's had a moment at the like that at work where you want to go off. But you got to be like, yeah, well, we decided.
Yeah, people dumber than me cut my check, okay? Like, I don't know what you want.
Was Thomas Andrews actually on the Titanic?
Yes, he was. Okay. Yes. He was on it. Bruce Ismay, the representative for the White Star Line, or the owner, I forget his actual managing director. So Bruce Ismay, the managing director of the White Star Line, is on there. Thomas Andrews, the architect and designer of the ship, is on there. John Jacob Astor, one of the richest men in the world, is on there. Molly Brown is on there. So, yeah.
I also have a little fun tidbit. The elderly couple seen huddling on the bed while water floods their room were the owners of Macy's department store in New York. The Strasses, both of whom died on the Titanic. The wife, Ida, was offered a seat on the lifeboat but refused so that she could stay with her husband. She's the real Rose. Ida Strauss is the real Rose, okay? She could have
Okay,
gone,
buddy.
but she didn't. She stayed. All right.
Okay, buddy.
We need to point out the true heroes. I don't know if it's a hero, but somebody's actual act of total dedication and love for their partner.
Yeah, what I read is that she said someone heard her say, "Where you go, I go," and that's what inspired Rose's lines. That was IMDb trivia, so it might be completely made up.
Well, I hope not, because that's how I get half
No,
my
I think
info.
that sounds accurate. I think that scene is heavily inspired by Isadora and Ida Strauss.
There you go.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Moving on. The ship is too big with too small of a rudder. This is just a line that's brought up. Was this Titanic's fatal flaw as we approach the iceberg?
So that's difficult to defend, because you could argue that you can't make rudders big enough for ships of a certain size even now.
Gotcha.
They're not designed to dodge around icebergs. Titanic's fatal flaw is that it's the biggest ship, the biggest passenger liner that has ever existed, and of its massive amount of staff, only 5% of them are crew. So you have a boat, a ship of 2,211-ish people, and you have 35 crewmen.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Why?
Because it's a passenger liner, and so you have a skeleton crew to run the ship. You have hundreds of stokers and engineers and stewardesses and chefs and staff, but you only have 35, 36 actual sailors on the ship. Titanic's fatal flaw number 1. Titanic's fatal flaw number 2 is that through nobody's fault, it set sail during a spring following a particularly warm winter where icebergs have broken off more than they usually do.
Okay.
Bigger icebergs that are surviving into warmer waters. So the Titanic takes the southern route, which is what you do until about May or June to avoid icebergs, and it doesn't matter. They're everywhere because you can't control nature. Titanic's third fatal flaw is that there is more and more and more proof that they had a coal bin fire from 10 days before they launched to about 4 days into the voyage. Relatively common, actually, in that era. Coal lights on fire. It's incredibly flammable. It is what it is. Standard procedure is you shovel it out, and if you can't shovel it out, you shut it in the bin. It burns. It's a metal ship. It's not going to burn through your ship. You're fine. Problem, though, is that iron that is being superheated and then flash frozen by below freezing ocean water becomes thicker and thinner in varying places. So when Titanic hits the iceberg, at the time of the movie, the assumption was that it cuts a big slash in it. In reality, it was like a giant hole puncher. When we sonar imaged it 20 years ago, 15 years ago, there are a dozen holes that are only about football or basketball sized, and they're spread out across the bottom of the ship. And so that backs the theory that through sheer coincidence, the coal bin fire happened on the same side of the ship that hit the iceberg, which, again, sucks to suck. Can't control that. Yeah. And it just, the iron that had coalesced around itself held, but the iron that had been weakened by the fire and the flash freezing punched. And so it was even more catastrophic damage than it normally would have been through sheer coincidence and fate.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah, as he said in his very forensic analysis, it was hitting Morse code. Da, 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 da. I also wanted to jump in and say that I had to double confirm it to make sure I wasn't wrong, but Ida Strauss's first name was Rosalie Rose.
Oh,
hey.
Rose.
Hey.
Oh,
okay.
Rosalie Ida Strauss.
That's incredible.
So somebody heard that story and went, "What if we built a love story around with much younger people around that line?"
Yeah, but
that's
not about
really
old
cool.
people. Could you imagine this being about old people?
It'd be hard to believe some of the run through the freezing water scenes later, for sure, if it was above
fair.
A certain age.
Yep. All right. Well, probably the most famous scene from the movie. Yeah, probably the most famous scene. Jack draws Rose like one of his French girls, aka a great reason to look at Kate Winslet naked for a few minutes. I didn't know it actually showed anything. I always thought this was like a PG-13,
It did.
Yeah, no, you see, okay, I was like, oh, wow, okay. Those are boobs. was like, it just caught me off guard.
You know who actually drew it, right?
James Cameron.
James Cameron.
Yep.
Really?
When you see the close up of Leo drawing it, you notice the hands get significantly older because it's literally James Cameron drawing.
Interesting.
And they tried, if I remember correctly, they tried to keep it as private as they could, so it was just the needed camera staff and Kate and James, like in the
Leo was in the room too, because apparently to break the ice, no pun intended, Kate Winslet
boo
on the first day of shooting walked up and flashed Leo to, just get that out of the way.
Honestly, that's a really good idea. Actually, like
I do it to everybody I meet.
Yeah,
anyways, I'm just kidding.
For PR purposes, that was a joke.
That was a joke. For a buzzkill, it's ironic the guy's name is Lovejoy. This is Cal's henchman, the man who enters the room in search of Rose and finds her once again with Jack. I think he's starting to put this together.
You think so?
They escape the hired cock block and make their way into the back seat of a stored vehicle in the ship's cargo. Then they do what my wife informed me is called watching the submarine races. I'd never heard that expression before. Have either of you ever heard that before?
No.
She looked it up. It's legitimate. Yeah, apparently watching the submarine races is code for doing the hanky-panky.
Is Schooly pooping in the bottom of a ship?
Yeah, might as well.
Okay.
Cal finds the note Rose left for him and the nude portrait that Jack drew of her. Yeah, that's not a great look. And the spotters see the iceberg, but it's dead center and close. I'm hoping I have this right. I don't know. I think so, but I don't know for sure. They go hard to starboard, signaling to hit the reverse engine. They reverse the engine, but it takes too long to turn, scraping the port side of the ship against the iceberg and causing several holes in the lower decks. Parts of the iceberg spill over onto the decks as they go hard to port, trying to go around it, and then they close all the doors as the engine rooms begin to flood. We kind of went over what happened, so let's just talk about the movie here. I love the image of the iceberg. I mean, it's terrifying, and it's supposed to be. The iceberg dead center. I mean, way too close.
Yeah, iceberg ahead is a way more iconic line than it probably should be. Because one thing that we haven't mentioned about this movie, the acting is immaculate, like all the way down the roster.
Perfection.
Like even these two guys who are in it for like 45 seconds and they're just the watchmen.
Yeah, do
perfect. And the calm but terrified response of the sailors is also on par, because they do everything immediately and quickly, but you can see like the terror in their faces, especially of First Officer William Murdoch, who is in charge during the night shift. Willie, as they call him a couple times during like the subsequent evacuation, and he's standing there and he calmly gives the order. Everything's happening, and he's standing there gripping the railing, and he just is whispering, "Turn, damn you, turn, come on, turn," because it's out of your hands. Like, you do what you can, and then you just hope that you can react fast enough.
Well, I thought it was interesting he sends, I'm not going to try to act like I understand everything. He sends the commands essentially by moving the dial forward and backwards, and I like how it is so gripping, because he sent it, and then the people down in the lower decks who actually have controls over that, they get it, and they're acting as fast as they can, but there's this delay, and so he's seen,
and it's steam engines, so they don't just turn off. Like, you've got to
and he's seen the iceberg, and they have no idea, so it's like he's relying on them, yet they can't see what they're about to hit. Very interesting, or just a great scene. Honestly, probably my favorite scene here is right building up to when the iceberg actually hits.
And what's fascinating in real life is that William Murdoch, who is an incredibly competent sailor, does not just order them to turn the rudder to starboard, which yanks the boat to port. So if you turn the rudder left, it goes right it goes left, vis-a-vis. No, what he does is he orders them how they need to move each individual propeller and the rudder to give his ship the best chance of survival. And so, as quickly as he can work the telegraph, he orders them to crank the 2 outer screws, so the 2 outer propellers, and to full stop the middle screw, which is the main speed propeller, in an attempt to slow the ship down and get it to turn. What he forgets to account for is that a ship that size at that speed actually turns more immediately at full tilt than it does slowing down, because as you lose forward motion, you have to use the forward motion to turn. And so you have to negotiate it, and he just miscalculates is all that happens. He does what you're supposed to do. He just forgets that his ship is 100 feet longer than any other ship except the Olympic.
I have heard that a theory that if they would have stayed their course, they would have missed the iceberg. This seems incredibly difficult to prove. Is there any legitimacy to it?
So it's not that if they'd have stayed their course, they'd have missed the iceberg. If people are saying that, they're wrong. Because the iceberg did appear just dead in front of the Titanic. No, what it is they should have just rammed it head on. They should have slowed the ship down as much as they could and just hit it up front.
Yeah.
Reason being, there was a German ship a couple years earlier that did the same thing, and it managed to limp to port. Or if nothing else, you close the watertight doors. If there's a leak, you run your pumps and you just telegraph for help, because you can keep the ship kind of even like foundered on the iceberg if you need to.
Okay.
But by
almost like docked on it, basically.
Yeah, more or less. Or crumple your bow, because bows are the thickest part of a ship, and it's a bunch of metal. And so odds are, if you just slam into it fast enough, it'll just crumple like a Coke can. And so you really won't have holes per se. You just won't be able to move very fast. But by sideswiping it, the sides of the ship are the weakest part of the ship by how buoyancy works, like they have to be. And so you exposed the weakest part of your ship to the sharpest part of the iceberg, effectively.
All right. Water has leaked on to the third class cabin levels. People on the higher decks are playing soccer with the large chunks of the iceberg. Jack and Rose return to confront Cal, only for him to frame Jack for stealing the Heart of the Ocean necklace. It doesn't help that he also stole the jacket that he's holding the necklace in. He was framed for it, but he did steal the jacket. He's arrested while the ship's designer spells out the disaster that they're all aboard, stating that the ship can stay afloat with 4 compartments that are filled with water, but 5 have been compromised, and they have 2 hours at most. What is a CQD?
It is the predecessor of the SOS call.
Okay.
So CQD was basically like ship in distress.
Okay.
Help needed. Mayday.
Also, were dinner and festivities actually performed while wearing life jackets?
So, yes and no. It's probably a little overly opulent in the movie, but it gets the point across pretty well. They didn't tell people the ship was sinking at first because they didn't want a mass panic. So they kind of played it off as like, it's procedure, whatever. So there were certainly wealthy passengers having their servants go get them things in the middle, because once again, and I cannot stress this enough, there are like 40 guys overseeing this evacuation of 2,200 people. An evacuation which, even if it is pulled off perfectly, is only going to save about 1,200 of those people.
Terrible.
That's the top max room you have in your lifeboats. And so there's this, people are ordering drinks, people are going back to their cabins, people are getting midnight snacks, people are refusing to get in the lifeboats because the ship is so big that at first nobody can really tell, especially if you're on the upper decks where the first class are, that it's sinking. There's also this thing happening where the servants or the stewards for each level are being overwhelmed by the amount of people they have to alert. So in first class, you're being told by the steward of your hallway, hey, you need to get your life jacket on, or your life belt is what they called them. I'll help you. Please get to the top deck, grab warm clothing. In second class and third class, you're just getting your door and throat open and saying, put your life belt on and get up to the top of the deck, because they have so many more people to alert that they don't have time to like help people get ready. Compounded by the problem that a lot of third class does not speak English as their first language.
Nice.
Because there's a lot of immigrants on that ship.
Right.
And
All right, Ryan, the Titanic's sinking. You're a man. You're not getting on a lifeboat. What are you doing?
Well, Well, I assume I would be in the lower decks because I ain't paying for them fancy rooms up there.
Yeah, we all
So
would be. It's fine.
I'm probably gonna be locked in under back one of those gates and trying to see how I can help people get out.
Right. All right. Kyle, what about you?
Okay. I'm terrified of deep water, so I'm actively crapping my pants, is what I'm actually doing.
That's fair.
But assuming that I'm a more heroic version of Kyle, a version of Kyle who knows his death is coming and faces it like a man and not a chicken, I like to think I'm pulling a John Jacob Astor and I'm helping load people into lifeboats.
That's
like,
fair.
I hope that that's what I'm doing.
Right.
I would say I'm also probably in my head being like, I have to remember all of this because if I do somehow survive, I'm totally making a comic about it.
There you go.
See, that's why Ryan survives. He has a purpose. I get petrified by fear and I just curl up in a ball and drown, probably.
I am doing one of two things. Either A, and here's the thing that I maybe you can answer this question. Maybe this is hindsight's 2020. Most of the Titanic is made of wood. Surely they have tools of some sort. Why were they not trying to make extra rafts that would at least support some people? Or I mean, is that just? I mean, surely you can take parts of. I mean, she floats on. We all know how this movie ends. She floats on a door. Surely you can put some things together to make something that would somewhat support humans. I mean, probably in a panic, too many people would jump on them and they would, sink anyways. But why is nobody trying to build anything here?
Well, there's a couple reasons. First reason is that protocol is that there will be a ship close enough to you to come help you, and they will take passengers off the lifeboats, send the lifeboats back to the sinking ship.
Gotcha.
Because generally speaking, ships are not that far apart.
Right.
Ships are not that far, actually, from the Titanic. I'm not going to get super deep into it. There's a ship that is close enough to maybe help that just abandons them to their fate for their own reasons.
Rude.
It's a whole nother thing. We could do like it's the Californian. Is the name of the ship, and we could do like a mini episode, like a 5-minute jot about.
Is that what the Titanic 2 movie is about?
Electric Boogaloo, probably.
There is a sequel.
But also, the Titanic is faster than any other ship afloat, except for the Olympic, and so they're farther away than they're used to being from other ships. Like they separate. Reason number 2, again, I cannot emphasize how few trained crew members you actually have on this vessel. You don't have enough men to launch all the lifeboats at the same time.
Gotcha.
Because it takes 2 men to launch the lifeboat, another to supervise it, and 1 or 2 more to load it. So you are barely going to get all the lifeboats launched in time. And in fact, that's part of the problem with the Titanic is that they have collapsible ones that they use as a last resort.
Yeah.
And one of them is put together so late that it swamps and people float on top of it as it is capsized in the water.
And that's in the movie too, yeah.
Yeah, and so you just don't have time for it. And third, if you start telling people who aren't crew to start building life rafts, everybody panics and everybody dies. And then reason 4, the water's 28 degrees. And so if you're exposed to the water at all, the chances of you making it are not really high. And so how do you launch a life raft? How do you make one? How do you decide who gets on the life rafts and who doesn't? I think it probably didn't even cross their minds, but if it did, it's not as feasible as it feels to us right now.
Yeah.
Because other than like slip and sliding your way down this deck, and you can't control a life raft, and if you can't get far enough away, the suction of the ship is going to pull you under the water.
I read that suction is not real. It's actually the air coming up makes the water less dense. And that makes it more difficult to swim in, but the actual suction of it is not a real thing.
Well, I don't know if it is or isn't, but they would have thought it was.
That was a quick Google search. There's not a whole lot to that.
But like back then, they thought that was a thing because they even yell it during the
right.
People believed that. So there's a lot of misinformation going around. A lot of just they don't know how to handle this. It's nothing that you expect to have happen. Despite what people think, liners do not sink really all that often, like at that time period. Like they have all these safeguards that like ocean liners don't just sink all the time. Like it's not a thing.
And I was thinking about that as I watched it last time, and I'm like, why wouldn't I just grab a door? But then so you have a door and you're on the ship. What do you do now? Do you jump off the ship holding the door? It's just going to break and you're going to die.
You fight over the door.
Or like when as the ship's slowly going down and it's sideways, and like if you're on top with Jack and Rose, are you just holding the door waiting until you're in the water? and then like you get sucked under and you got to like not let go of it and then like hope you're still holding it when you shoot back up. Like
Yeah.
it's once you have this door, your only hope of a door helping you survive is if you find it when you're already in the water, because what are you going to do with your door?
And here's the sad part. None of these people know they're going to survive because they don't know
Yeah.
that there are ships coming for them. So you might just be moving from the Titanic to freeze or drown in the water to just much more slowly freeze to death in your freaking lifeboat or starve or die of dehydration. Like, you don't know.
All right. Well, if the makeshift lifeboat is not going to work, I'm going to go with plan B, and that is drink until I see 2 Titanics, and then
A
go to
guy
sleep.
did that and survived, actually.
See? Look at that.
Yeah, I'll
I have
mention
good
him
ideas.
later, but he pops up as like a brief cameo in the evacuation of the ship.
Yeah, so let's just kind of breeze through this because a lot of the movie, this is probably a good hour of the movie.
Oh yeah.
A lot happens. We tie up everything very nicely, but we're gonna kind of breeze through, so I'm not just reading, a big plot of the movie. They do mention that the nearest ship will not arrive for 4 hours. As you mentioned, the lower class passengers are made to wait, while first class passengers board the very few lifeboats there are, women and children first. Cal tries to weasel his way on early. Also, Jack is handcuffed to a pipe that Rose comes back, and after getting off of a lifeboat, she comes back and karate chops or uses an axe to cut the handcuffs.
Chain.
I like that little moment where he's like, all right, hit that same spot twice, and she misses it by a foot, and he's like, good enough.
He's like, look,
what other option do you have?
Even if you cut my hand off, at least I'm out of this pillar.
At least I'm out of here. Like you're facing not a very good death there.
Yep.
Mr. Andrews says the boats are built to hold 65, yet they're only being filled halfway, some leaving with only 12 on them. I didn't put this in the questions, but is there any truth to that where the lifeboat's not full like they could have been?
Okay, yeah. So roughly 1,200 people should have fit in those lifeboats.
Right.
735, I think, are who survive from the
Yikes.
Titanic. I'll double check that, but yeah, it ain't good. Like they don't fill them. Also, people are just refusing to get on them. The men themselves who are loading the lifeboats are panicking. And I'm sorry, 710 survivors. So less. It's so awful when you put it into fractions. Only about half of the people were going to survive anyway, and only slightly more than the half that could have survived got on a lifeboat.
Yeah.
So it's bad. They're filling it with 20 people, 25 people. Part of it is they don't trust lifeboats. Part of it is they don't know what they're doing. Part of it is, as a crewsman who is manning the lifeboat, the faster I get the lifeboat gone, the faster I am not going to die on this sinking ship.
Right.
There's a lot of it. At the end, they start packing the lifeboats.
Mm-hmm.
There's also, they didn't run a lifeboat safety drill, which was standard back then because it was so cold. It was like 40 degrees every day,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't want to have to do it. It's also, the Titanic sinks in 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Yeah, not a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah, and so by the time you are loading the lifeboats, it's been 30 minutes.
Yeah.
You're a quarter of the way dead. And like water's flowing in, the boat is going like this, which is making launching the lifeboats progressively more difficult.
Right.
So it's a cluster. It really is. It's a bad look for the White Star Line. It's a bad look for like British passenger liners in general. It's a terrifying thing for people when not only are only half of the people going to survive in the best case scenario, but you barely get half of the half that are supposed to survive into a lifeboat. Like it's rough.
Yeah. So we're gonna wrap up our movie here. This is the very difficult to spin into something positive part of the movie. Cal does try to shoot his fiance in front of hundreds of people, so that's fun. And then he uses a child that he ignored earlier to weasel his way onto one of the lifeboats.
One of the last lifeboats.
Yeah. So, Kyle, your sister texted me and said, I need to get a poll from everyone. Could Jack have fit on that door? I say no. And I say that they do it. I say they do it very subtly. They do it very subtly that he starts to come up on it, or maybe it's just her getting on it. He realizes how unsteady it is, and he is essentially holding it still for her and holding it from flipping. No, I don't think even with just her body weight, it's barely floating, and you can see the water spilling over the top. It's a miracle that she survived. Well, I mean, it's fiction, but and even with the assuming that it's real, she barely survives.
Yeah, they rescue 6 people from the water who aren't in the lifeboat.
Is that an actual fact, or is that just from the movie?
No,
Okay.
that's an actual fact. Of the 1,500 people that go in the water ish, 6 live.
That's
5 of them because
insane.
they do something that resembles what Rose does. One of them because he is drunk as a skunk and his blood vessels are so dilated from alcohol that it keeps his body warmer than they should for long enough for a lifeboat to yank him out
Drinking
of the water.
saves lives, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it here. Drinking saves lives. Yeah. A lot of good solemn. I like how as people realize the ship's going down, they're either solemn or they are in a panic. The orchestra playing their final song, the captain standing behind the wheel, the old lovers embracing in bed, a mother that the most heartbreaking part's a mother who puts her kids to bed for the final time, who is I forget her name, Velasquez from Aliens. Ryan, you a fan of Aliens?
Yeah, there's a joke about that in one of my books about how people don't realize that's a white woman in brown face playing that role.
Vasquez,
Ooh.
yeah. Vasquez.
Fun tidbit
brown
about
face. I didn't know that.
Fun tidbit about the scene in Titanic with her is that the story that she's telling her children is an Irish folktale about a magic kingdom that you get to by drowning.
Very fun.
And so it's that like that mother's last comfort is that I'm going to put you to sleep with this story the only story that's possibly going to comfort you right now. Oh.
Yeah. The amazing thing about that whole hour of the film where all this is happening is you really get to dig into the emotions of what's happening to every character because they've put into the work in the 2 hours before that of introducing everything you need to know through other contexts. Because if they interrupted all of this happening to give some monologue about how many boats there are, or how many, if they need to explain where the water's coming in, where is this located in the ship, you've already seen Rose running through there's no reason for her to run through where they're shoveling coal unless you're making sure the audience knows how the ship is set up. You've seen her go down the stairs. You've seen her ask questions about why there's this many boats here. And so all of this is already in your head. And of course, you've seen the terrible CG animation that they're showing an old lady of how she almost died.
Yeah.
And so they don't need to explain what's happening because it's already in your head and you didn't realize they were teaching you everything you need to know.
All building up to that last
and
moment.
You've already experienced Captain Smith's like calm confidence, and you've already experienced First Officer Murdoch's like overly formal bearing. And you don't. Second Officer Charles Lightoller isn't even by name, but he's the guy who yells, "I'll shoot you all down like dogs," and he has the empty revolver in his hand. He's the highest ranking officer to survive the Titanic sinking. And he is, by all accounts, the one who led the evacuation the most efficiently, which is also true in the movie. Though is another good historical fact is you've got William Murdoch, whose sanity is barely hanging on because of the tragedy he's facing. You have Captain Smith, who can't be in enough places at once to like fix anything, and then you have this one not known because he's the second officer, but this starkly British, like you will all form lines and you will all get in the lifeboats like guy. So,
2 fun facts here. The scene where the water comes crashing into the grand staircase room, they only had one shot at that because the entire set and everything inside of it was going to be destroyed in that. Also, the movie Titanic 2 is real, and its IMDb score is 1.7.
Oh my god.
Maybe for an episode, a special episode further down the line. Further down the line?
No.
Come on, Kyle. We're doing
refuse.
300 Rise of whatever it is, and then we're going to do Titanic
Rise of an
2.
Empire or whatever.
Okay, yeah, so Rose in present time.
Refuse.
No, we're going to do it. The people want it. Rose in present time.
Oh, by the way, Jack freezes to death. Just in case somebody hasn't seen this movie.
If you didn't know that.
Jack freezes to death, and the film was slowly making the screams more quiet in the background as people freeze to death is so brutal, but it so really good. Is.
The one thing you just reminded me of, I had read that we were clowning earlier on the character in the movie for showing that animation to Rose, and James Cameron was clowning on that character, and then James Cameron invited one of the survivors, one of the only living survivors of Titanic, to watch the premiere of Titanic, and she's like, "No, why would I do that? That sounds like a terrible, traumatic experience."
She's like, "I wasn't even old enough to remember it, but no, thank you."
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. So, in the movie, fun fact, Rose has had the diamond the whole time. She knew where it was. And she's like, yeet, and tosses it into the ocean. This forever young moment at the end really makes you feel some type of way. When Rose is asleep, possibly dead. It doesn't really say.
Presumably dies.
Presumably she dies peacefully, or she's just dreaming. Either way, she's back on the Titanic with young Jack and all of the crew and all of the people that were having the time of their life before disaster struck.
As the world's most famous slide whistle solo plays.
I really thought there was lyrics to that. Are there lyrics to it?
There are.
Okay, it's just not in the movie?
No, but in the trailer, the lyrics are in it, and it's a very powerful song for the movie.
It's a great song for the movie. I do think they cut to it a couple too many times.
Oh, probably.
I'm like, you really could have. Whenever Jack sinks should have been, I think, the first time you really hear the full.
But I like that they change it every time they cut to it, though.
Yeah,
like that's good. You know.
Yeah, it's decent. Okay, all right, it's decent. It's pretty good. Yeah. So and also Rose says that when the depression hit, Cal put a bullet in his brain, so that's fun.
Him and a bunch of other rich people.
Did the survivors of the Titanic actually arrive at Ellis Island?
Yes. To the best of my knowledge, they did. So, being a survivor on the Titanic is incredibly traumatic for a lot of ways. Because you are all hoarded into New York City and Ellis Island because that's the only place big enough to receive all of you all at once. But also you are floating in a lifeboat for the better part of 2 hours, hoping that somebody comes and finds you. And the RMS Carpathia finally does, and the Titanic is big enough that it has 4 smoke funnels. The Carpathia has 1.
Okay.
And so you see this very relatively small steamer come out and haul you aboard on ropes and rope nets, half frozen, and then start asking you, who's alive? Who are you? What's your name? Who are you missing? Who are you? What's your name? Who are you missing? Then they start hauling on bodies while they still have live people. And they go, because they have to. Like, it's a rescue mission. And so they, not a lot, but a few. And then later they haul on more, but they're like, who's this? Do you know them? Who's that? Do you know them? And the entire time, you have no idea what has happened to the people that you love. You're pretty confident they've died, but you're hoping they haven't. And the absolute worst part is if nobody survives that isn't on the Carpathia. So if they're not on that boat, they died. And that becomes very, very clear to the survivors as they reach New York City, and there's no other groups of survivors there.
This is kind of a bonus question I just thought of. Anybody on the lifeboat that didn't make it?
Actually, yes, a few.
Okay.
So there is a collapsible lifeboat B, I think, one of the collapsible lifeboats. It's the last one to be picked up by the Carpathia. And the story around it is fascinating but tragic. It's one of the last ones to be launched. It is literally launched by the waters sweeping over the deck of the Titanic as the bow sinks. This older couple, I forget their names. I wrote a YouTube script on them for the Dark 5 channel, so I can't believe I can't remember them. But this older couple, Swedish couple, I believe, run to the lifeboat and grab onto it while they're being swept by the floodwaters.
Yeah.
The man holds on. The woman gets swept away and drowns. They haul him on. He dies of despair somewhere in the night, as do 2 of the off-duty stokers, so engineers, who die of exposure, basically.
Okay.
And when the Carpathia rescues that boat, there's like 3 living survivors and 3 dead ones. And so they pull the living people off, and then they just set the boat adrift, where it is discovered a month later by a random German steamer with the body still in it.
Interesting. All right. Yeah. So, like you said earlier, the water, the night the Titanic sank, 28 degrees Fahrenheit, meaning death could occur from hypothermia between 15 to 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like 2 hours for them to get back.
It took 2 hours. And the Carpathia is 4 hours away. Basically, there's 3 ships that could potentially help the Titanic. The Californian's the closest. It never responds. We're pretty sure they knew something was up, and the captain just decided it wasn't his problem. An older liner tries to get through the ice field and can't, because the Titanic is almost through what they called the ice field, which is just this giant roaming amount of icebergs. They can't get there. So they, in the morning, when they can see, because this is another important thing, they hit it at night. And so all the rescue efforts are also hampered by the fact if I hit an iceberg, like, we're all screwed. So the Carpathia is the farthest away, and the captain of the Carpathia immediately alters his course and goes as fast as he can for 4 hours through the ice fields to find the survivors of the Titanic. So he, in an incredible show of seamanship, navigates his ship as fast as he can get it to go through an ice field of constantly changing ice flows that he can't see any better than the Titanic could to go rescue these people.
Wow.
Not knowing if he'll make it in time because he's very aware that he's 4 hours away.
Right. All right. Ryan, I don't know if I gave you a heads up on this or not. We do a thing called Biggest Dope, Biggest Nope.
I'm ready.
It's 30. We try to do it in about 30 seconds apiece. Favorite thing about the movie, least favorite thing about the movie. Who wants to start?
I'll start because I have a biggest audience dope and a biggest historical dope, which I haven't been able to have before.
There you go. All right. Well, we're just got 2 dopes from Kyle. Does that mean I have to do 2 nopes?
Wow. I hope not. So my biggest audience dope is the just the opulence of it, like their ability to show you how incredibly like stupidly rich these people were, is amazing. And then my biggest history dope is the band. Actually,
nice.
The band played all night long, and the music, the song that plays as the Titanic is finally sinking, is, according to survivors, the song that the actual band played.
Nice.
And they stood there on that deck all night.
Wow. All right, Ryan, go ahead.
I'll say my biggest dope is just all the lines that they had taken from actual. Like, I can't imagine the amount he had to read to find just little lines he put in the movie that were things. Oh, I remember a guy saying that, or this is what my dad sent to me. Like just a simple line, like when the dad says, "It's only for a little while." Like that's something somebody said my dad said to him, and it's very sweet that these things that people thought, as they're dying, are carried on into the future. Yeah. And that leads into my nope, which is that the way they treated William McMaster Murdoch, which I'm curious if you have any insight on this, where people say there's no evidence that he shot a guy and shot himself or even was taking bribes. And they just, there are a lot of people who are very upset about the way he was portrayed. And it's like, if you don't have evidence, I don't know why you'd make him a historical villain.
Yeah, that's so fair. As far as...
Wait, hold on, I haven't done mine yet.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll respond after Dustin does his
real
biggest
fast,
dope.
Real fast. All right, biggest dope. Easy. All the acting, man. Everybody nailed the role 100%. The biggest nope. I'm gonna have to go with the CGI shot, that wide shot. I kind of laughed at it. All right. Now Kyle, go ahead.
Okay, so the Murdoch's fate is, other than he dies, are unknown. Here's the thing, though, is that part of the curse of the Titanic disaster is that people cannot accept that there's not a villain. There's nobody to blame. Nobody inherently did anything wrong. Even the theory that the Titanic was going too fast, the Titanic wasn't going any faster than anybody else would have. It just happened to be a faster ship. But it's standard procedure to just get through the ice flows as fast as you can and hope that you see them. So there's this idea that like Captain Smith allegedly freezes and is like overtaken with indecision, but eyewitnesses are like, no, he was right there the entire time, giving orders and keeping people calm. There is a group of eyewitnesses, including passenger George Rimes and third-class passenger Eugene Daly, who claimed to have seen an officer shoot one or two men during a mad rush for a lifeboat, then shoot himself. It has been rumored that Murdoch was that officer. However, Officer Lightoller, so the highest ranking officer to survive, the guy who's like, I'll shoot you all down like dogs, and then loads his gun after he says that, he wrote Murdoch's widow saying that when Lightoller himself was taken down, that he saw Murdoch trying to release collapsible lifeboat A and then being swept overboard. The problem, though, is that when cross-examined, Lightoller probably was not somewhere that he would have been able to see collapsible lifeboat A, i.e., he would not have been able to see Murdoch work on it. So it seems relatively likely that Murdoch probably is the person who killed the people and killed himself. Because later in life, Lightoller admits that someone died by suicide in the disaster, and a son of a close personal friend of Murdoch said that his father, so Murdoch's friend, had told him that Lightoller had admitted that Murdoch had killed somebody on the Titanic. There's no hard evidence for anything that happens that night, except for like the science part of it. It's all hearsay. But the thing that people don't always manage to understand is that you are a well-trained naval officer who knows that at best, 1 out of every 2 people that are facing you are going to die. That means hundreds of children, hundreds of women, all of the staff on the boat, all of the crew are prepared to die. And this goes on for 2 hours, which is an incredibly short time for a ship to sink, but is an incredibly long time to be facing death looking death in the eye and trying to keep your composure. And it is incredibly possible that Murdoch does his absolute best and right at the point of where it doesn't matter anymore, loses his cool and then decides to take the quick way out. And I don't think he should be shamed for that like he has been. Like, I think the representation of it in the movie makes it feel shameful because he takes a bribe. And there is absolutely no evidence of anybody on the Titanic taking bribes because that was not a thing. Because you're pretty sure you're going to die. So if they hadn't have added the bribe, I don't think it would have rubbed people the wrong way, because without the bribe, it's a man who is looking his death in the face and just taking his own way out. But with the bribe, it's a coward who takes the coward's way out. And there's no evidence of that at all.
All right, well, I'll say then it's still my note, but if in any chance any of that did happen, then I'll change my note to the terrible Picasso joke that goes on way too long and is way too cliche.
There you go. That's a good one too.
Yeah, so you said the highest ranking officer, and I'd been doing a little bit of looking up because I was curious about one specific person. The highest ranking White Star official is Bruce Ismay, who did end up surviving.
And who did sneak his way onto a lifeboat.
Yes, and did face a lot of criticism for it. And also just looking at, because I was confused between these two people, I just saw this thing. Lightoller sailed one of his ships in the Dunkirk evacuation.
You want to know how Lightoller survived the Titanic? He got pulled under the water, and then he got blown out of it when one of the boilers exploded.
Very nice.
And was launched 30 feet through the air and landed in right next to a freaking lifeboat.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
All right, boys. That was Titanic. Let's give it a rating. I'll go first. I never go first. Ooh, so much suspense. I'm gonna give it an 8.5 out of 10. I loved this movie. I really didn't think I was gonna like it, and I was very much impressed with how much thought, how much the production of it. It was great from start to finish. I really enjoyed it.
All right, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
Had to one up me, huh?
Not to one up you, but because I
fine.
cannot think of a context that I wouldn't want to watch this movie. Like, not
On a
back to
boat?
back days because it's long. Maybe on a boat. That might be the one. But there's so much to love about it. And then one more note on Murdoch, just because we brought it up, and I just found this in my spot research that I do as we do these things. So James Cameron is on record as saying that his depiction of Murdoch was not meant to be negative, though he acknowledges that it comes across that way. But one thing that is lost in the movie is that in real life, Murdoch has half of his lifeboats launched before Lightoller gets any of his launched. So he's very much like the reason that a lot of people make it. And Lightoller is the one who's sending out not fully loaded lifeboats. So the thing about the movie is that nothing in there is just hearsay. Like there at least like there were eyewitnesses who claimed to have seen it. So James Cameron didn't make, other than the bribe part, like James Cameron didn't make up Murdoch's potential suicide. It's just we can't prove that it happened. Which is part of the reason I want to give this movie such a high rating, is because everything that happens can be traced back. So even like you guys said, like Rose abandoning a lifeboat to stay with the love of her life is Ida Strauss refusing to get on a lifeboat to stay with the love of her life. Like this movie is just so deep and so well crafted and so true to the history and the emotions of the event that it's kind of incredible, honestly.
All right, Ryan, what's your rating?
Well, I'm an easy mark. If there's an artist who wants to make a movie and manage to make exactly the movie they want to make and find success, whether I want to watch it or not, and in this movie I do like the movie, so that's even better. I give it a 10 out of 10. Who cares? He wanted to make the movie, he made it. Great.
Is this James Cameron's magnum opus? Is this his one?
I'd say so. I mean, I think, don't get me wrong, I think Avatar is really, really good.
See, I don't like
this
Avatar.
is better.
I'm that one. I don't like Avatar. I tried to get into it. I don't understand why it's so big and popular. If I was going to put one above it, I mean, personal enjoyment, I'm going to put Aliens above it, but I can be objective enough to say that I understand that that's not legitimate for how well made this movie is.
Well, I think it's like Steven Spielberg's made a lot of good movies, and I would argue that good as Jurassic Park is, Raiders of the Lost Ark might be a better movie, but Jurassic Park is Steven Spielberg's magnum opus. Like that's the one where you're like, that's Spielberg. Like he did that. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm going through his
Piranha 2 The Spawning, though?
I was going to say Piranha 2. That's funny. Yeah, no. No. Yeah, Terminator 2, Titanic, Avatar. Yeah, it's hard to say.
Well, maybe put it this way, like watching Terminator 2 would not necessarily make you want to go watch other James Cameron movies. Watching Titanic makes you want to go watch other James Cameron movies. You're like, bro, if he could make me cry over a boat.
Yeah, I mean, it's different genres. Terminator 2 is considered by a lot to be like the greatest action movie ever. Fun fact here, looking at it, Terminator 2 has the highest star rating on IMDb out of all of his movies.
Speaking of the fact that this is only like a 7.8 on IMDb is criminal.
No, the 66% on Rotten Tomatoes from the audience.
That is also criminal.
What is happening?
Drink some coffee and suck it up, boys and girls.
I'm
like,
so
this movie is amazing. I cannot overemphasize that this is a movie based around a romance that had Dustin hooked and he enjoyed it. Do you know how rare that is? We have found the Hope Diamond in Arkansas, guys.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And for some fun history, if people want more history, the guys who are doing the Morse code that saved everyone, if you want to just look into Marconi, it's way too much to get into. He's a real dick. But the amount of power he got out of the fact that people were saved and what he did with it, I wrote a comic about it, but I'm not going to tell you to buy the book. Just there's an article called .dis. Just Google that and read that, and he was the victim of the first hack. Because people hated him so much. And that's just a fun little article about some fun history if you want some side tangents from the Titanic.
He's also an objectively subpar human who stays and drowns to save as many people. Like he sends the messages until the ship's power goes out, which is like 5 minutes before it fully sinks. So it's pretty incredible.
All right, Ryan, where can people find you? What you got coming out? What you got going on? Yeah, little self
Yeah,
plug here, man.
Go to ryanestrada.com, mynameplus.com. You'll find thousands of pages of free comics, information about, like I said, Banned Book Club, No Rules Tonight, Occulted is a story about my friend who grew up in a UFO death cult and how she escaped. Student Ambassador is a series of adventure mystery comics inspired by places I've traveled. But there's so many things you can find there. And like I said, a lot of them are about history and I tried to take some of the same lessons here in how for me, when you tell a story about history, the most important thing is what does that history interrupt, and that's what makes Titanic fun. Is that we're not doing that, seeing the boat go up and crack and CGI. We're being like, these people were trying to go on a hot date, man.
Right.
Like that's what I love.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was a great one to talk about and record. This should be the one that comes out, kind of our second act for season 3. So we've got more coming your way. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be more of it. So
there's going to be more, baby.
Look forward to that. Thanks, guys, for making it to the end of the episode, and take care.
See ya. And later, Jack points out a tidbit.
Shut up.